So, let's go through this. Okay. What I have done for you is I have looked online. Okay, so if you look on the VLE page, okay, if I go back to the VLE page, I've actually linked a GeoGebra file, which I've done this for you. So these two files here, you've got central limit theorem, R code and lyrics, and you've also got the central limit theorem itself. If you're familiar with computing, if you're familiar with using the program R, okay, which some of you I believe will be, okay, I've actually written some code which does this automatically. So I've basically fed it this file, okay, I've basically fed it this file, done a bit of data processing, but effectively what I've got the computer to do is take a random sample of, I think, something like 1,000 samples and then calculate the mean of those automatically. The reason why I get a computer to do it is because they can do it far quicker than I can do it by hand. Okay? So I've literally got a computer to do exactly what I've just asked you to do. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to go away and have a look at it. However, all you really need to understand is what is going on here. Okay, what's going on here? So on the right-hand side, this is a file called GeoGebra. Now you can go and have a look and see how I put the file together if you're interested. But effectively what I've got going on the right-hand side here is a spreadsheet. Okay? Now each number in that spreadsheet represents when the computer does a different sample of 5 words. Okay? So for example, that top number there, which is 3.6, represents the first time that the computer has selected 5 of those words at random and taken the mean. Okay? And then the next number down is a different random sample of 5 words. The next number down is a different sample of random 5 words, and so on and so on and so on. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, go on.
Does it take all the words?
Yes.
No duplication?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we don't know. Okay. So we don't know whether it takes the whole word. I just said just go and select 5 words at random. I didn't put any conditions on. You can't have duplication or anything like that. Now, can you have a look at the screen for me? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to see visually what happens as I increase the number of samples. So at the moment, you can see along the top here, I've got the number of samples to be 1. In other words, it's just simply selecting the first number in that spreadsheet, that 3.6. So what I'm going to do is literally do what I did on the screen. Okay, I'm going to start to build up a histogram of the number of times each word comes up. Okay, so just watch what happens as I increase the number of samples. Then I'm going to ask you, well, what's actually happening here as we increase the number of samples? Okay, just watch the screen. So at the moment it's at 1. What's happening? What's happening? Go on, Hoja. Okay, so you're starting to get, what do we call the name of that distribution? Does anybody remember? The normal distribution, right? So you're starting to get that normal distribution. That's to be expected, yeah? Because we saw here that the majority of words should fall somewhere around 4 or 5. The majority of those samples should lie somewhere close to the true population mean, okay? But then it might be the case that just by pure chance, you end up with a sample that has all of the long words in. Hence, you're getting samples which are out here. Okay, but there's a really small chance of that happening. Okay, and likewise, just by pure chance, you get a sample which is filled with all of the shortest words. Hence, you get a sample which is down here. But again, the chances of that happening are really, really small. Does that make sense? Yeah? So that makes sense that we should get this kind of normal distribution shape. But what else did you notice? Let me do it again. Okay, so let me reset the number of samples back to 1. Okay? And let's see what happens. All I want you to do is just tell me what happens here. So as I increase the number of samples, what's happening? Okay, so as I increase the number of samples, would you be happy that it gets centered around the true population mean? In other words, the sample means approach what's happening at the true population level. That makes sense? So it's centered around that same point. But what do you also notice about that curve as it grows? It gets steeper. In other words, it becomes less spread out. Does that make sense? Watch it again. Okay, watch it again. So here, can you see it's quite a spread out curve? Do you see that? It's like a really flat, spread out curve. But then as I increase the number of samples, you're dead right. Steeper is a decent word. I understand what you mean there. It's kind of becoming much narrower.
Because the tendency towards to the mean.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. The tendency of the data tends to be towards the true population mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is true with the central limit theorem, but it's also the case that the spread of the distribution becomes smaller, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay? So the spread, or the, what do we give the name of the spread with statistics? Standard deviation. Good. So we get this, but we also get this. So the standard deviation gets smaller. Okay? It doesn't ever really reach zero. There's always going to be some measure of spread, but it gets smaller, definitely. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's the standard deviation of our samples. Are there any questions about that? No? That's a really fundamental idea. Really fundamental idea. Okay? So this is the central limit theorem. The idea is that if you take lots and lots of samples, the mean of those samples collectively should approach the true population mean. Okay? But it's also the case that the standard deviation across all of those samples should also increase. Okay, so just picture this. Literally watch this curve growing, and then that should be an indication of what's happening with the central limit theorem. Does that make sense to everyone? Are there any questions?